Welcome to lesson 3, week 3, where we are going to do an overview of the Constitution. So, we're not going to explain everything in depth because we're going to be breaking down the Constitution in chunks and look at each part with its history and what's important about it in the weeks following. But we want to get an overview because having the big picture is a good idea. So let us start looking at a big view of the Constitution. So we know that the Constitution has several different parts. So it starts with our preamble, and probably most of us memorized that preamble somewhere in our youth for our civics classes. There are 7 articles that were the original Constitution, and then 27 amendments. And when you think about it, like this document, this founding document that runs our nation, that defined for other nations how to be successful, like you can make a constitution. We have 27 amendments in all the years that constitution has been in force, which is really cool. So remember, what is the Constitution? The Constitution establishes the U.S. government and describes how it operates. So it's the operating laws and rules, and it clarifies the rights of citizens, even though it doesn't limit the rights of citizens. So remember, our philosophic backstory for the Constitution is that there are the laws of nature, which say people generally are kind of selfish and will argue all the time and make their existence uncomfortable. And so we have also at the same time the natural rights: life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. Those are our rights. In order to protect from those laws of nature, the selfishness, and to secure the rights, we have governments, and we give governments some of our responsibilities, some of our freedoms, in order for the government to help protect our rights. And the government has responsibility to protect those natural rights and to operate in what is best for the people. So let us start a nice overview here. So we start with the preamble to the Constitution. All right. You remember this from school? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So the preamble shows to everyone our basic, our rights, our purpose, our philosophy, and that we're agreeing to ordain and establish the Constitution for the whole country, for the United States of America. Let's then look at the articles. So there are 7 articles in the original Constitution. So the first article, Article 1, is the legislative branch. And that branch is Congress, of course. The legislative branch is bicameral. It has 2 parts called houses. There's the House of Representatives and the House of Senate. So we call it the Senate. So the House of Representatives is set out to be based on representation by population, and that the Senate has 2 legislators from each state. And when we go into the deep dive, we'll talk about how that is a compromise to make sure that the small states aren't left out of any voice, and that the larger states aren't marginalized when the small states get a voice. So it balances things out. Then there's the executive branch in Article 2. The executive branch is made of the president and the vice president, and also that it is elected by a college of electors. We will do some deep dives into that. Presidents must be a natural born citizen and at least 35 years old. So that we will do more work on that in the whole executive branch, all the departments and all. But in the original articles, this is what we have. All right, Article 3 is the judicial branch. The judicial branch is made up of the Supreme Court and other federal courts. Interesting, all federal judges hold their position for life. So it's not just the Supreme Court, our lifetime positions, unless they're convicted of a crime. Article 4 is important because it defines that states have powers. So states have the powers to create and enforce their own laws. However, they're also required to respect the laws of other states and reasonably enforce them where that's necessary so that they work together to solve problems. All right, then very important, Article 5 describes the amendment process that our Constitution can be changed. It takes the amendment process for that to happen. Amendments have to be introduced and passed by 2/3 of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then it goes to the states to be ratified by at least 3/4 of the states' legislatures or conventions. So the states decide whether it'll be that. All right. And then we talk about the supremacy clause in Article 6. So in Article 6, we talk about that federal law is supreme, it's higher than state or local laws. So that if a state law conflicts with the federal law takes precedence. And that, of course, we will talk about more in our lesson with Article 6. Okay, Article 7 is the ratification. And that means, we talked about last time, that once the Constitution was agreed upon at the Constitutional Congress, that it went to the states. Each state had a convention that had to ratify it. 9 of the 13 states needed to ratify the Constitution in order for it to be enacted. All right, so that was the core of the Constitution. And as we know, not everybody was happy that there wasn't a Bill of Rights attached to the original document of the Constitution. And so the first amendments were what we call the Bill of Rights. And we'll talk about in our lesson why it took an amendment rather than being initially there, because people were arguing about whether they would limit rights by defining them. And so it took a while to get that hammered out. So we'll talk more about that. So, but these are just the foundation. This is what makes America, America is our Bill of Rights. So you want to hear a funny story before we start that Bill of Rights. All right, so when I was a kid in college, I was working at our local mall in the Sears, at our local mall there in our little small town in Florida. And so I was taking a break, sitting on some stairs that led to, Sears was up high and you had to go down the stairs or an escalator to get to the rest of the mall. And I was just chilling, and some college students were there, and they were taking a survey, like a petition they were circulating to get people to sign on, wanting a constitutional amendment that people should have freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of press, and the government shouldn't interfere with those things. And so when they came to me and they said, "Would you sign our petition?" And I said, "I don't need to sign that. It's our Bill of Rights." And he said, "You're the first person today who knew that." So not everybody knows the Constitution, which is why we're talking about it now. It is important that we study our Constitution. It is so like we have to know, like, people can steal our rights from us the way our government works if we don't remember that our Constitution is there to protect it. All right, so let's talk about the Bill of Rights. All right, Amendment 1 is our foundational big amendment. So it covers the freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. The freedom of religion is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That Congress cannot make one religion our religion. Congress cannot not say that we are required to have a religion, and that we have the freedom to believe as we wish. The freedom of speech, that our right is solid in our freedom of speech. We cannot have that abridged. The freedom of press cannot be stopped. The freedom of peaceable assembly is one of the freedoms in the Amendment 1. And then the freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. We have a right to go to our government and complain about things. This is why I'm always telling folks, write your elected officials, Like, we have the right to do that. It's hard to imagine, but not every country has that. Okay. All right. So Amendment 1, freedom of religion, press, speech, assembly, petition. Amendment 2, the right to keep and bear arms. So it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And we'll go into more depth on the history of that amendment and the arguments about it in the lesson there. All right, quartering of soldiers is Amendment 3. No soldier shall be quartered in the home of a citizen without consent of the owner in peace or in war unless it's prescribed by law. And so again, we'll talk about it later. We don't run into that much. Ever heard of anybody running into that? No, because it's in the Constitution. All right. Amendment 4, search and seizure. So government cannot arrest a person without probable cause, and we have restrictions against unreasonable searches and seizures. Amendment 5, we have the right to grand jury, due process of the law. We cannot be tried twice. It's called double jeopardy for the same law. We all have the right to due process of the law. All of these things are in Amendment 5. So right there in our Bill of Rights is we have some freedom to fair trials is basically what Amendment 5 is. Amendment 6 says we have a right to a speedy trial by jury with witnesses and counsel. So people are not left on their own, and they're not left sitting in jail for 10 years, without being charged or not given a trial. Amendment 7 is we have the right to a jury trial even in civil lawsuits. Amendment 8, it says that we are not allowed to be fined excessively or given cruel or unusual punishment. So that is right in our founding documents. Very important is Amendment 9. So non-enumerated rights are retained by the people. That just means that in this Bill of Rights, there's only 10 things that are listed, 10 amendments there. There's no way you can define every single one of our natural rights. So if it's not on the list, it's still there. And so those non-listed rights are held by the people. They're still there. Amendment 10 also says the rights that are not listed, they're not part of the Constitution and not prohibited by the Constitution, are given to the states and to the people. So states have rights, people have rights, and the government is supposed to work together to preserve those rights. So that's our Bill of Rights. So, and that's not the whole thing, of course. So we have then the amendments go further on. So the Bill of Rights was 1791. So wasn't long after the original Constitution was signed, ratified, and put into practice. All right. Our next amendment was in 1795. It's Amendment 11, and it talks about citizens, in most cases, cannot sue states in federal court. So that was important enough that it got an amendment to the Constitution in 1795. Amendment 12 talks more about the election of the president and the vice president. This came about in 1804. And this will go into a lot of details. It talks about electors and all. We need more time to deal with that. We will do that in a separate lesson. All right, next comes what they call the Reconstruction Amendments. So after the Civil War, the people who had been enslaved, one needed to be constitutionally free, like the Constitution needed to say that slavery was abolished. So Amendment 13 says that slavery has been abolished. That's it, that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, it can be instituted. Like it's out of fashion. You can't do it. It's against the law. And we will talk about the accepting crime part when we deal with Amendment 13, because that became a thing. Amendment 14 is our huge birthright citizenship and more on due process and equal protection under the law. So there are several sections in this amendment. It will take a lesson to talk about this. But it most importantly is that it clarified that if a person is born or naturalized in the United States, they are citizens of the United States and of the state where they live. If they are born in the United States, they are a citizen of the United States. So that's a thing that goes round and round these days. This is 1868 where that was codified. All right, so we will go into more detail on all the different sections on that, because it talks about also, like in section 3, no person shall be a senator, representative in Congress, or an elector for the president or the vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. And so that is an interesting section. It also, section 1 has that no state can deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection under the laws. And you will see this Amendment 14, come up over and over again in history, civil rights era, even today. All right, so let's go on to our next section. So Amendment 15, all male citizens can vote. So that is the last amendment in the Reconstruction Amendments. So all male citizens can vote. So that was their way of saying, hey, formerly enslaved males could vote. You notice that formerly enslaved females and no females could vote in those times, but at least the formerly enslaved males could vote. And that's codified in the U.S. Constitution, Amendment 15. All right. Then there were no more amendments between 1870, when all male citizens age 21 can vote, at Amendment 15. No more amendments until 1913. So it's a span of a few years there. Amendment 16 codified that we could have an income tax. Now, there had been an income tax during the Civil War, and it made people mad. But Congress finally passed an amendment. So in the Constitution, that Congress can tax income. Also in 1913 was a big year for amendments. They worked more on the election of senators, clarifying that they're just making sure everybody knows that there's 2 senators from each state. They're elected by the people for a term of 6 years, and each senator only gets 1 vote when they vote on things in the Congress. All right. Amendment 18 is a fascinating one. It's the only one that has been repealed. In 1919 was the prohibition of liquor. And if you want to read a book about that time period, read the book In His Steps by Charles Sheldon. And it's not specifically about the prohibition of liquor, but that's what the story turned into. So it's really interesting on the look at the culture of that time. All right, and so there was a prohibition on the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors within, and the importation thereof into, or the exportation thereof from the United States. All right, and then it was repealed in Amendment 21 in 1933. So 1919 to 1933, the Constitution said no liquor is going to be made or sold or transported around the United States. All right, Amendment 19 is in 1920. And it is the women's right to vote. So it took until 1920 for women to be given the right to vote in Amendment 19. Amendment 20, it was in 1933, and it talks about the terms and the working session. So it's a practical amendment for the president's vice president and Congress. Basically just starts with a term ends and the new president starts on January 20th. So it used to be March, and they moved it up to January 20th. So there's not such a long lame duck session. And Congress begins its term on January 3rd. And so there's just more like bureaucratic details, but needed to be codified so things were clear. There wasn't another amendment until 1951, and that was the 2-term limit for the presidency. So no person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. And that is in reaction to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served 4 terms, was elected for 4 terms. And the Congress decided, we want to just codify that that is not going to happen right there as an amendment to the Constitution, just as a safety measure. All right, Amendment 23 is the U.S. citizens in the District of Columbia have the right to vote for president. Did you know that the citizens in the District of Columbia did not have the right to vote for president until 1961? So it took till 1961 that the U.S. citizens in D.C. could vote for president. In 1964, Amendment 24 came along, and it was the abolition of poll taxes. So it took until 1964 to make clear in the Constitution that people could not be taxed. They did not have to pay to vote for the president, the vice president, or U.S. senator or U.S. representative. All right. Amendment 25 came on the heels of the assassination of President Kennedy, and so the Congress wanted to clarify what would happen in a crisis situation. So Amendment 25 is the Presidential Disability and Succession Amendment, and it just clarifies that if a president dies or cannot serve, the vice president becomes president immediately. If both died, the Speaker of the House becomes president. So there's a line of succession if something happens. Um, so if the president becomes unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office as determined by the vice president and a majority of his principal officers of the executive departments or members of Congress assigned by law, the vice president immediately assumes office. So you can imagine why that came about in that crisis situation. All right, Amendment 26 is an amendment I particularly remember because I was coming of age in that era. And so it was the U.S. citizens aged 18 or older have the right to vote. That's 1971. And so the reason why that came about was the Vietnam War. And our young men who were being drafted to serve were getting really irritated because they could be drafted at age 18 and couldn't vote. They didn't have a say about what was happening to them. And so this amendment clarified that they had a right. If they had to serve, they needed the right to vote. So U.S. citizens age 18 or older could not be denied the right to vote. And then our last amendment has a good story. So hang in there for that, the lesson where we talk about that one. And that is the longest amendment that it took to ratify, almost 200 years. It's called the Congressional Compensation. And it says that Congress must limit when and how much it is paid. And so there's a good story there. Stay tuned on that. All right, so that is your congressional overview. I'm sorry, your constitutional overview. I am looking forward to going week by week through this. And listen, none of us needs to be a constitutional scholar, but we should all know our foundational documents so nothing gets stolen from us. Be wise and be basically informed. It's our American citizenship right and responsibility.